Jenny Millers woke before the sun. She always did. The silence of early morning wrapped around her like a familiar, threadbare blanket. She slipped on her shoes, tugged her coat over her shoulders, and stepped into the sleepy chill of rural Kansas. The 3-block walk to Rosie's diner was quiet, save for the distant hum of an early freight train and the crunch of leaves underfoot. Rosie stood nestled between a shuttered hardware store and a laundromat that never seemed to close. The neon sign buzzed faintly overhead, half the letters flickering. Jenny unlocked the door, flipped the sign to open, and tied the same faded blue apron around her waist. It smelled faintly of coffee and pancake syrup and long days. Inside, everything waited just as she'd left it. Ketchup bottles full, napkin dispensers neat, booths empty. She took a breath, letting the silence settle before the day began. This was her place, her rhythm. The coffee brewed in steady drips, the grill crackled to life, and soon the first regulars would trickle in, Harold with his crossword, Lucille with her endless stories, the young mechanic who always ordered bacon but left most of it untouched. She greeted them all with practiced warmth. Her smile was gentle, constant. Few noticed how her eyes rarely matched it. Jenny lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment above the pharmacy. The walls were thin. Some nights she could hear the pharmacist's teenage son playing guitar at odd hours. Her living room window looked out onto the diner's roof, where pigeons gathered in the mornings. Inside, the shelves held yellowing photographs, her father in his army uniform, her mother laughing in a sun hat, a girl with braids who looked like Jenny but smiled wider. Her father died when she was 15, a heart attack, sudden and cruel. Her mother followed 2 years later, cancer that came fast and spread faster. Her aunt took her in for a while, a woman with stiff hugs and too many house rules. But arthritis in Arizona had called, and Jenny was left with a room, a job, and a mailbox that only filled on holidays. Loneliness didn't scream in Jenny's life. It lingered. It waited at the edges, between coffee refills and closing shifts, in the silence after a long day. But she endured. She always had. People came and went. Orders changed. But Jenny remained. A quiet presence behind the counter, reliable as sunrise. Some lives aren't marked by milestones but by repetition, by doing the same thing every day, because it's what keeps you going. Jenny didn't need much, just the familiar clang of plates, the low hum of conversation, and the quiet dignity of being needed, even if only to pour the next cup of coffee. And so, each morning, before the world stirred, Jenny walked to the diner. She opened the doors, turned on the lights, and waited. Not for anything in particular. Just in case someone came in needing something she could give. It was a Tuesday in early October when Jenny first noticed him. He wasn't loud or messy, didn't draw attention like some kids did when they came into the diner after school, with sticky fingers and half-shouted laughter. No, this one was different. Quiet. Still. Almost like he was trying to disappear into the corner booth where he sat, always the same one, farthest from the door, shadowed just enough to feel safe. He couldn't have been more than 10. Small for his age, with eyes too careful, too old. They scanned the room not like a child watching, but like someone cataloging exits. His backpack looked nearly twice his size, resting beside him like a silent companion. A book was always open in front of him, though sometimes she wasn't sure he was reading so much as hiding behind it. The first time he asked only for a glass of water. Jenny brought it over with a paper straw and a gentle smile. He nodded once in thanks, barely perceptible. She didn't ask questions. Something in his posture warned her not to. The second day, he returned at the same time, 7:15 a.m., just as the early sun filtered through the diner's cloudy windows. He sat at the same booth, water again, book again. No food. By the end of the week, it had become a pattern. He'd come in, quietly slip into the booth, order nothing, say little. Watch, read, wait. At 7:55 sharp, he'd close his book, murmur a thank you, and leave. Jenny learned from the school bus schedule that he went to the elementary school 3 blocks down. No parent ever dropped him off or picked him up. Most customers didn't notice him. Those who did never said much. He blended in like an extra shadow. But Jenny noticed everything. The way his stomach sometimes growled loud enough to startle him. The way his fingers trembled slightly as he turned the pages of his book. The way his eyes lingered, just a moment too long, on the plates she set in front of other customers. She found herself watching the clock each morning, a quiet expectancy settling over her just before he arrived. And when he came, she felt a strange sort of relief, like something fragile had returned safely to where it belonged. He never smiled, never volunteered his name. But Jenny didn't mind. She'd known that kind of silence once. Tight-lipped, chest-hollow silence. The kind that came from trying not to need anyone. So she let him sit, let him read, let him sip his water and pretend he wasn't starving. She waited, not for words, not for thanks, just for him to come back tomorrow. The third morning, Jenny didn't wait for the boy to ask. She brought the glass of water with a slice of lemon floating in it, just in case he liked it better that way. He looked at it, then at her, and offered the smallest of nods. Still no words. But there was something in the way his hand curled around the cup, a gentleness, like it mattered that someone had thought of him. By the 4th day, she timed it. At exactly 7:15, the door chimed. He slipped in, eyes sweeping the room, lingering for half a second too long on the booth before making his way there like it was his, like maybe it was the only place in the world that felt predictable. Jenny didn't say a word, just placed the water on the table with quiet precision, the way one might set down a gift and step back. He never drank it fast. Sipped it slow, like he was trying to make it last. She'd seen that kind of pacing before. People stretching what little they had, as if hurrying might betray how badly they needed it. It reminded her of old winters, her mother pouring soup into chipped bowls and saying, "Slow down, there's enough," even when there wasn't. Jenny started noticing things. How his shoes were worn through at the soles, how he never had a jacket even when the wind picked up. How he watched the grill more than his book sometimes, eyes following plates as they were carried to tables. Hunger wasn't always loud. Sometimes it sat very still, tucked between pages of a book and a glass of water. He came every morning, always alone, always early, never late, and never with a story. Jenny found herself wondering about him at night. Who let him walk to school that early? Who packed, or didn't pack, his lunch? What kind of home sent a child into the cold with nothing but a book and a look that said, "Don't see me"? But she didn't ask. Instead, she started folding extra napkins into the water glass. Sometimes she left a wrapped straw with a silly design on it. Dinosaurs, stars, a smiling sun. Just small things. Quiet offerings. The boy never reacted, not in any big way. But once, when she turned to walk back behind the counter, she thought she heard him whisper something. Not loud enough to catch the words, just a breath that might have been "thank you." It was enough. So she kept bringing the water, not because it filled him, but because it made him stay. On the 15th morning, Jenny walked out of the kitchen carrying a plate she hadn't planned to serve. 2 pancakes, warm and golden, a small curl of butter melting on top, syrup in a tiny glass cup beside them. She hesitated by the boy's table, her smile playing the part of confusion. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said lightly, setting the plate down as if it had been a mistake. "The kitchen made an extra. I'll just leave it here instead of throwing it out." The boy looked up slowly. His eyes narrowed just a bit, not in anger but in calculation. like he was trying to decide whether this was a trick, whether kindness came with a catch. Jenny could feel the weight of that stare. It was too heavy for someone so small. "It's okay," she added, voice softer now. "Sometimes the cook gets orders mixed up. Better to eat it than waste it, right?" She turned away before he could refuse, gave him space, pretended to be busy behind the counter while watching from the corner of her eye. At first he didn't move. Then his hand reached out, fingers brushing the fork like he was afraid it might vanish. A pause, then a bite. He ate quickly but not messily, every motion precise, efficient, like someone who knew how to savor something without drawing attention. Jenny didn't approach him until the plate was empty and the syrup glass wiped clean with the last bite of pancake. He didn't look up when she cleared the plate. But just as she turned away, a whisper, so soft it barely touched the air. "Thank you." Jenny nodded without smiling. Too much warmth, she thought, might scare him off. But something in her chest swelled, something fierce and aching. She hadn't just fed him. She'd cracked something open. The next morning she, accidentally, brought scrambled eggs and toast. No explanation this time. Just a plate set down and a silent nod exchanged. The morning after, oatmeal with brown sugar. They never spoke of it, never made it official. But day by day, the boy kept coming, and Jenny kept feeding him. And in the silence between them, something unspoken grew, fragile, necessary, real. Jenny started noticing the little things, how he always arrived at exactly 7:15, not a minute earlier or later. How he took the same seat in the corner, the one where no one could sneak up behind him. How he placed his backpack on the inside of the booth, keeping it close, like it held everything that mattered. And how he never touched his book until she brought the plate. Then, and only then, would he open it, carefully, like he needed to earn the right to escape into its pages. She noticed the way his eyes moved, not like a kid idly looking around, but like someone trained to assess, to anticipate. He watched who came in, who left, which cars pulled into the lot. Jenny knew that kind of alertness. It was the kind people wore when they didn't feel safe, the kind learned too early, too fast. He never lingered. At 7:55, he would close his book, fold his napkin just so, and whisper a thank you before disappearing into the morning. Jenny would watch him slip down the sidewalk, backpack bouncing slightly against his narrow shoulders, and wonder where he went once the school bell stopped ringing. Some mornings, she saw his fingers tremble when he picked up the fork. Other times, his eyes darted to the clock like he was running on borrowed time. Once, she thought she saw a bruise half hidden beneath his sleeve, but it vanished behind the fabric before she could be sure. She didn't ask. Questions could scare someone like him, could make him disappear. She started bringing extra food wrapped in foil, banana muffins, a small sandwich, an apple sliced and sprinkled with cinnamon. She never offered it directly, just left it on the edge of the table with a casual shrug. He never took it in front of her, but the packages were always gone by the time she returned. She tried to guess his name, wondered if it was something old-fashioned like Henry, or soft like Eli. She didn't know why it mattered, but somehow it did. She imagined the house he went home to. If there was one, if anyone was there waiting. If maybe he left the lights off so no one would know he was alone. Every night, Jenny walked home thinking about him. A nameless boy with tired eyes and empty pockets. A child who showed up without fail, asked for nothing, and left behind nothing but a cleaned plate and a quiet space. And every morning, without fail, she made something warm and filling. Just in case. Kathy cornered Jenny behind the counter one quiet Wednesday morning, her voice low but edged with concern. "You're feeding a stray," she said, nodding toward the boy's usual booth where an untouched plate of oatmeal waited. "Not saying it's wrong, Just saying, be careful. Good intentions don't fill a register. Jenny didn't flinch. She kept wiping the counter, her motions calm and practiced. He's just a kid. Exactly, Kathy said, folding her arms. A kid with no name, no money, and no one asking where he is. That sets off alarms. Jenny looked up, met Kathy's eyes. He's not causing trouble. Yet, Kathy replied. Look, I've seen this before. You give a little, they take a lot. Then one day, poof, gone, and you're left with an empty wallet and a warning to others not to bother. The words stung more than Jenny let on. But she didn't argue. She never did. Instead, she nodded once and walked away, sliding behind the kitchen doors where the grill sizzled and the fryer hissed. There, she could breathe again. Later, Harold, the retired postman who nursed the same black coffee each day, tapped the counter with a wrinkled finger. That kid you keep feeding, he said. What's his deal? Jenny shrugged. Just hungry. Harold grunted. Aren't we all? Mark noticed too. One afternoon, he lingered by the till longer than usual, pretending to sort receipts. You using your tips to cover that food? He asked casually, not looking up. I am, Jenny said simply. He paused, then nodded. As long as it doesn't come out of the drawer. It didn't. Jenny made sure of that. She'd long since learned how to stretch her income, skip the bus, skip lunch, skip the dentist. It wasn't sacrifice, it was a choice. After her shift, she sat in the break room alone, untying her apron slowly. She thought about what Kathy had said, about kids who vanish, about good intentions going bad. But all she could see was the way the boy's shoulders had begun to relax, the way his eyes had started to lift, just slightly when she approached. She remembered being hungry, not just for food, but for safety, for someone to see her without asking questions. So she decided, if he showed up tomorrow, there'd be pancakes. No questions, no conditions, just a warm meal and a seat that was always his. Jenny never asked where he lived or why he was alone. She didn't press when he glanced at the door more than once every morning, or when he seemed to flinch slightly at sudden sounds. His silence wasn't stubborn, it was survival. And Jenny understood that all too well. Each morning she placed a plate in front of him, whatever the kitchen had extra of, or whatever she could quietly arrange from the scraps of her own budget. Scrambled eggs with a slice of toast, a small fruit cup, sometimes just pancakes with butter and nothing else. He always ate, never fast, but never leaving a bite behind. And when he was done, he'd whisper a thank you, just loud enough for her to hear if she was listening for it. She always was. Others might have asked questions. They might have demanded a name or a story or a parent's number. But Jenny believed kindness without strings was the only kind that meant something. She had spent enough of her own childhood having to explain, to justify, to plead. She knew what it meant to be offered help that came with conditions, glances full of pity, or worse, suspicion. So she gave what she could, not because she needed answers, but because he clearly needed the food, the seat, the 39 minutes of safety every morning before the world pushed back in. She noticed the small things. How he started looking up when she approached the table. How once, just once, he cracked a nearly invisible smile when she slipped him an extra cookie left over from the breakfast special. It was gone by the time she turned back around. Some days she sat with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup, watching him through the reflection in the window. Not staring, just making sure, just being there. And still, she didn't ask. There was something sacred in the silence between them, a quiet trust built on unspoken understanding. He didn't need to explain himself, and she didn't need to know. All she needed was to make sure that when he came through that door, there would always be a plate waiting. Sometimes kindness isn't about fixing a thing, It's about letting someone know they're not invisible, that someone sees them, hears them, and chooses not to interrogate the cracks, just to fill them, gently, with warmth and breakfast. The whispers began subtly, tucked between bites of toast and sips of black coffee. They came from the regulars, people Jenny had served for years, people who thought they knew the place and everyone in it. They didn't say the boy's name, mostly because they didn't know it. But their meaning was clear. "Must be nice to get a free meal just for showing up and looking sad," muttered the man in the gray suit, who always ordered rye toast without butter. "Back in my day, nobody handed you anything for nothing," another chimed in, adjusting his cufflinks like he was making a point. Jenny didn't respond. She poured coffee, cleared plates, nodded at orders. She'd learned a long time ago that some criticisms weren't meant to be answered. They were projections of discomfort, of ignorance, of fear. And it was easier for people to condemn what they didn't understand than to sit with it. Still, it stung, not because she needed their approval, but because their words carried the same cold certainty she remembered from foster meetings and church charity lines. That helping someone was only valuable if it was earned, if the recipient looked sufficiently grateful. The boy never asked for the food, never begged or made a scene. He simply showed up and ate, quietly and with the kind of dignity that only comes from pretending you're not starving. Jenny continued to serve him, same as always. A plate placed gently in front of him, a refill of water, a soft smile. But she noticed the looks more now, the way conversations dipped when she walked past, the half-smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. One woman even left a folded napkin on the counter with a note scribbled in lipstick. "You're being taken advantage of." Jenny threw it away without reading it twice. Sometimes kindness made people uncomfortable. It held up a mirror, showed them the parts of themselves they preferred to keep tucked away. It reminded them that generosity didn't need witnesses or rewards, that helping someone could be as simple and as quiet as setting down a plate of food and walking away. So Jenny kept doing what she'd always done, and the boy kept coming back. The office behind the kitchen smelled faintly of burnt coffee and old paper. Mark sat behind the desk, tapping a pen against a stack of invoices, sweat beading at his temple despite the humming fan. When Jenny stepped inside, he didn't look up right away. Just tapped. Tap. 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 "I've been watching you," he said finally. Not unkind, but not gently either. "With the kid." Jenny stood quietly, hands folded in front of her apron. She'd been expecting this. Can't have employees handing out free meals. Bad for business. Sets a precedent. She nodded once. "I understand. I'll cover the cost. From my tips." Mark looked up at that, eyebrows lifting. "From your tips, Jen. Those barely cover your rent." "It's my choice," she said. Her voice didn't waver. There was something steady and rooted in her tone, like she'd already had this argument with herself and won. Mark leaned back in his chair, studying her. "1 meal a day?" "1 meal," she repeated. The silence stretched, broken only by the ticking of the cheap wall clock. Then Mark sighed, rubbing his face with both hands. "Fine, but if it affects your shifts, or if there's trouble, you stop, immediately." Jenny nodded again. "Understood." She turned to leave, and just before she opened the door, Mark spoke again. "It's not that I don't get it. I do. But the world doesn't always reward people for caring too much." Jenny paused. "I'm not looking for a reward." Back in the diner, the boy sat at his usual booth, reading his book, pretending not to glance toward the kitchen. Jenny walked over with a plate, warm pancakes, and a pat of butter slowly melting in the center. She set it down without a word. He didn't thank her right away, but she saw the way his fingers stilled, how his eyes softened just a bit. She smiled to herself as she walked away. Some things were worth paying for. The morning felt off before Jenny even stepped through the diner's front door. The air had turned sharp overnight, carrying the bite of the season's first real cold. She tied her apron slower than usual, her hands not quite as steady, her thoughts drifting toward the booth in the corner. His booth. At 7:15, the bell above the door jingled, but it wasn't him. A pair of construction workers came in, rubbing their hands and asking for hot coffee. Jenny served them with a smile, but her eyes kept flicking to the window. She told herself he might be running late. Maybe he missed the alarm. Maybe he found another place to go. By 7:30, she had started his usual plate anyway. Pancakes, light syrup, the edges just crisp the way he liked them. She set it on the table at 7:37. The steam curled gently upward, then slowly faded. At 7:55, she stood near the coffee machine, watching the door. A woman with a stroller came in, a man needing change for the laundromat. But not the boy. The plate went untouched. She tried not to let the worry settle in her chest, but it did. Heavy and familiar, the kind that came when someone disappeared and you had no way to find them. No number, no address, no name. By 8:15, she carried the cold plate to the back and stared at it for a long moment before wrapping it carefully in foil. She couldn't bring herself to throw it out. Instead, she placed it in the fridge, next to the carton of milk she'd been saving for him. Maybe tomorrow. But the next morning came, and still, he didn't. And Jenny realized with a quiet ache that she had no way of knowing if he was okay. No way of finding him if he wasn't. 10 days. That's how long it had been since Jenny last saw the boy. 10 mornings of glancing at the clock at exactly 7:15. 10 plates made and left untouched. 10 quiet shifts where the corner booth sat hollow, its emptiness louder than the chatter of regulars and the clang of dishes behind the counter. By the third day, Kathy had stopped commenting. Even she could see that Jenny didn't want to hear it. By the fifth, Harold gave a quiet grunt and muttered, "Maybe he moved." Jenny nodded like that made sense, though it didn't. Not really. Kids like him didn't move. They vanished. Each morning, she made the same plate. Sometimes pancakes, sometimes eggs. Something warm, something waiting. And each night, she wrapped the untouched food and took it home, placing it gently in the fridge like a memory she couldn't throw away. The worry had grown slow and steady, like water filling a glass. She didn't know his name. She had no way to ask if he was safe, or if anyone had even noticed he was gone. What she did know was that somewhere out there, a boy who had trusted her with his silence was missing, and there was nothing she could do but wait. She told herself not to get attached, that he had probably found somewhere else, someone else. But late at night, in her small apartment above the pharmacy, Jenny would stare at the ceiling and wonder if he was cold, if he was still hungry, if anyone had asked him where he went when he stopped showing up. On the 10th day, she stood behind the counter, hands wrapped around a mug of lukewarm coffee, eyes fixed on the empty booth. She didn't hear the bell when someone entered, didn't notice the plate being cleared from another table. All she saw was that empty seat. And for the first time since the boy walked into her life, Jenny felt something like helplessness curl around her ribs. She'd never expected gratitude, never needed answers. But she hadn't expected the silence to feel this loud. The photo showed an empty booth with a plate of untouched pancakes, the syrup starting to congeal in the morning light. It had been taken from behind the counter. Jenny recognized the angle, the slight blur of the salt shaker in the corner of the frame. The caption above it read, "Rosie's Diner, now serving imaginary charity cases." Must be nice to have a ghost kid eating on the house. It spread faster than she expected. First a few comments, sarcastic, eye-rolling, the kind that made jokes at someone else's expense, then dozens, then hundreds. People who had never stepped foot in the diner now had opinions about the food, about Jenny, about kindness. Publicity stunt. Feeding strays just creates dependency. Bet she cries into her apron every night. Watch your wallets next time a kid looks sad. Someone's running a scam. Jenny read the comments in the dim light of her apartment, the glow of her phone turning her face pale and still. She wasn't sure who had taken the photo, but that hardly mattered now. The image had a life of its own. The worst part wasn't the jokes. It was how easy it was for strangers to turn something quiet and good into something ridiculous. As if kindness had to be earned, as if feeding a child without a name was naive instead of necessary. She set the phone down, picked it up again, read the comments one more time, even though she knew she shouldn't. The words wormed their way under her skin. They always did, even when she told herself it didn't matter. In the morning, she still made the pancakes, still placed them at the booth, even as customers gave her side glances or smirks. Kathy didn't say anything, neither did Mark. The silence spoke loud enough. The booth stayed empty, but Jenny left the plate there anyway. Not because she believed the boy would come back that day, but because belief and kindness weren't always the same thing, and she refused to let cruelty decide which one she held on to. She sat on the edge of her bed, the apartment silent except for the occasional hum of the refrigerator below and the soft creak of floorboards as the building settled into the night. Her phone sat beside her, face down now, though the words from earlier still rang in her head. The laughter, the smug certainty, the cruel suggestions that she'd made it all up, that her kindness was delusion dressed up as virtue. Jenny wrapped her arms around herself, chilled not from the cold, but from something deeper. For the first time since she'd started slipping food to the boy, doubt whispered in the corners of her mind. Maybe Kathy was right. Maybe the boy had just vanished, taken what he could and left. Maybe this had been foolish. She'd built something in her mind, something quiet and sacred, a shared understanding between a woman and a child who had no one. But what if it hadn't been real? What if it had all been projection, a sad waitress clinging to purpose in a small-town diner that no one noticed anymore? The ridicule cut sharper than she expected. Not because it exposed something false, but because it distorted something pure. She hadn't fed him for attention. She hadn't taken pictures or posted stories. She'd just seen someone who looked how she used to feel and acted. But now, with each cruel comment replaying in her head, it was hard to hold on to that clarity. She stood and walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and stared at the wrapped plates stacked on the top shelf. One for each day he didn't come. Little bundles of hope turned into quiet reminders of absence. She touched the foil, then closed the door. At the back of her closet was a small wooden box. She hadn't opened it in years. Inside, she found what she was looking for, a faded photo of her father in his uniform, his smile soft despite the desert behind him. Next to it, a weathered leather journal. She flipped through the pages until she found the one she always returned to, the one that held his handwriting about a boy he once fed during a war. About how giving away half a ration had made him feel more full than keeping it. No one grows poor by sharing half a loaf. Jenny traced the words with her finger. Maybe the world didn't notice. Maybe it mocked. But she knew the difference between performance and purpose. Tomorrow she'd make the pancakes again, just in case. She pulled the wooden box from the back of her closet, dust dancing in the light that filtered through the window. It had been years since she'd touched it, maybe longer. The lid creaked open, revealing its contents like a memory cracking back to life. A photo of her father lay on top, the edges curled, his smile gentle beneath the sun-bleached brim of his helmet. He looked young in the picture, younger than she felt now. Beneath the photo sat his journal, the leather cover worn smooth, corners softened by time and use. Jenny sat on the floor, legs folded beneath her, and opened the book to the page she always returned to. The ink had faded slightly, but his handwriting was steady, exact. She could still hear his voice when she read it. Shared a half ration with a local boy today. Johnson said I was crazy, that he'd probably give up our position to the enemy. Maybe. But the look in his eyes when he ate, same as mine when Mom saved me the last piece of bread during the hard times. No one grows poor by sharing half a loaf, but those who forget to share remain hungry their whole lives. She read it 3 times before closing the journal and holding it to her chest. Her father had known hunger, not just the kind that gnawed at your stomach, but the kind that hollowed out your spirit. He had understood that a meal could mean more than food, that sharing, even in silence, could restore something lost. Jenny thought about the boy, about the way he clutched his fork like it might vanish, how he never asked for anything, only received it with a quiet kind of grace. She thought about the voices online, the mockery, the assumptions. And then she thought about her father, young, far from home, offering food to a stranger for no other reason than that it felt right. The world hadn't changed much, she realized. There were still hungry people, still watchers and whisperers, and those too proud to ask for help. But there were also those who gave without needing a reason, those who saw the need and chose to meet it. She placed the journal back in the box, her father's words echoing in her mind. No one grows poor by sharing half a loaf. She stood, quiet but steadier than she'd been in days. Tomorrow morning, she would make the pancakes again. The wind had picked up overnight, rattling the diner's old windows and coating the sidewalks with brittle leaves. Jenny arrived early, as always, though her steps were slower, her hands tucked deeper into her coat pockets. 23 days. That's how long it had been since the boy last walked through the diner's door. She had counted each one, marking time not with a calendar, but with the quiet ache of absence. Still, she made the pancakes. They came out a little lopsided this time, too much batter on one side, syrup dribbling down the plate. She didn't fix it. She just carried the plate to the corner booth and set it down gently, as if he might appear behind her at any moment. The diner filled with the usual sounds, coffee pouring, forks scraping, the occasional clatter of dishes. But for Jenny it all felt muted. The booth remained empty, the plate untouched, steam slowly curling into the cold air before fading away. Kathy passed by, giving the plate a glance but saying nothing. Even she had run out of warnings. People had stopped commenting, stopped asking. The boy had become like a rumor, faint, fading, easy to forget. But Jenny couldn't forget. She wouldn't. She wiped down the counter, refilled mugs, took orders, but her eyes kept drifting back to that booth. She thought about his small frame, the way he gripped his fork, the way he never quite relaxed. She missed the soundless thank yous, the way his presence had become part of her rhythm. By the end of the shift, the plate was cold. She didn't throw it out. Instead, she wrapped it carefully, folded the foil tight, and slipped it into her bag. She didn't know why anymore. Maybe hope was a habit she couldn't break. Outside, the sky hung low and gray. As she locked the diner's door behind her, she looked back through the window, at the empty booth, the small shadow it had cast in her life. 23 mornings. But still, one more plate, just in case. The bell above the diner's door chimed as Jenny refilled Harold's coffee, her movements automatic, mind elsewhere. The plate at the boy's booth sat untouched again, day 23, and the hope she had folded into those pancakes had begun to taste more like grief. Then it happened. The low, synchronized hum of engines grew louder outside, cutting through the usual sounds of a slow morning. Conversations dipped. Forks paused. Jenny looked up just as 4 black SUVs turned into the gravel lot, their tinted windows reflecting the pale Kansas sky. They moved with eerie precision, parking in a tight semicircle facing the diner. Government plates glinted on each vehicle, stark against the dust. No one got out at first. Jenny stood frozen, a coffee pot in one hand, the other clutching the edge of the counter. The door swung open a moment later, slow and purposeful. A man stepped inside, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a formal military dress uniform that caught the light with every step. His chest bore a neatly arranged field of ribbons and medals, and his face, weathered but composed, scanned the room with the certainty of someone used to command. Behind him, 2 younger officers followed, equally solemn, equally still. The diner, for once, was silent. Mark emerged from the back, straightening his tie in a nervous twitch. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked, voice thinner than usual. The senior officer removed his cap. His eyes found Jenny immediately. "I'm looking for someone," he said. "Jenny Millers?" Her name sounded strange in his voice, important, heavy. Jenny stepped forward, apron still tied at her waist, the coffee pot now trembling slightly in her grip. "That's me." The man gave a quiet nod, then reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a crisp envelope. "I'm Colonel David Reeves, United States Army Special Forces Command. I've come with a letter and a message from Adam's father." The name hit her like a wave, crashing through the layers of silence and unanswered questions she had buried over the past weeks. Adam. The boy had a name. And suddenly the room seemed to tilt. Every glance, every morning, every whispered thank you now reassembled in a new light. Jenny blinked, but the colonel was still there, holding out the envelope, the weight of his presence anchoring her to a truth she hadn't seen coming. Outside, the other soldiers stood at attention. Inside, Jenny's world was about to shift forever. The colonel stood in the middle of the diner, like he had stepped out of another world, one of precision, purpose, and heavy consequences. His uniform was immaculate, dark blue trimmed with gold, ribbons catching the light in careful rows across his chest. He held his cap in one hand and the other extended slightly, not for a handshake, but to steady the silence that had fallen. Jenny stared at him, her feet rooted to the linoleum floor behind the counter. She could feel every eye in the diner shifting toward her, but the colonel's gaze didn't waver. It was kind, but steady, deeply serious. "Are you Jenny Millers?" he asked again, voice low but clear. She nodded. "Yes," she said, though the word barely made it past her lips. He stepped forward, slowly, respectfully. "I'm Colonel David Reeves, United States Army Special Forces Command." He paused, then added, "I've come on behalf of a fallen soldier and his son, Adam Thompson." The name landed heavy in the room. A hush fell again, deeper this time. Jenny's breath caught. Adam. The boy. The silence that had followed his absence now cracked open, sharp and raw. She didn't need to ask which soldier. She knew, even before the envelope was placed gently in her hand. "This is a letter," the colonel said, "from Master Sergeant James Thompson. His final request was that we find you. You meant something to his son. Adam told him about you, about what you did." Jenny stared at the envelope. Her fingers trembled as she took it, the paper stiff with importance. She wanted to ask 100 questions, but couldn't find her voice. The colonel's tone softened. "I know this must be overwhelming, but Adam is safe now. He's with his grandparents in Colorado. His father, James, didn't make it home. But before he left for his final deployment, He wrote about you. He knew someone was feeding his son, taking care of him without asking why. That mattered to him. It mattered to all of us." Jenny felt the sting behind her eyes. The room was still, reverent now. Colonel Reeves took one step back, straightened, and gave her a formal nod. "He wanted you to know. You didn't just feed a hungry child. You preserved the dignity of a soldier's son." Jenny pressed the envelope to her chest. She didn't speak. She couldn't. But the truth was clear, written in the silence between them. She hadn't just been a waitress, not to Adam, and not to the man who gave everything to keep his promise. The name hung in the air like a secret finally spoken. "Adam." Jenny barely breathed as Colonel Reeves continued, the letter now in her trembling hands. "Adam Thompson," he said again, gently this time. "That's the boy's name. His father was Master Sergeant James Thompson, one of the most respected men I've ever served with." Jenny felt the room tilt slightly, the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. Adam. The silent boy in the corner booth, the one who never asked for anything, the one who stared at pancakes like they were a gift too good to last. Now, he had a name, a family, a story she hadn't known, and a father who would never come home. "He never told me," she whispered. "He couldn't," the colonel replied. "When James was deployed, Adam's mother left. No note, no goodbye, just gone. The boy was afraid someone would find out and take him away. He was trying to wait out the school year alone, surviving off what his dad had left behind." Jenny's eyes burned. She imagined Adam waking before dawn, slipping out of an empty house, showing up at the diner with hunger he dared not admit. All while pretending he was just another student on his way to school. "He told his father about you," Colonel Reeves continued. "In the few letters they exchanged before James's final mission, he said, 'There's a lady at the diner who gives me food. She never asks questions. I think she knows I need it, but she doesn't make me feel ashamed.'" Jenny swallowed hard. Her voice came quiet. "Is Adam okay now?" "He's safe," the colonel nodded. "With his grandparents in Colorado. He's healing. But James, he was killed in action 2 months ago. Before he left, he wrote one last letter. Told us if anything happened, we needed to find you. Thank you. Make sure you knew." The letter in her hand felt heavier than anything she'd ever carried. "He said you didn't just feed his son," Reeves finished. "You gave him dignity. You gave him a reason to keep going." Jenny closed her eyes, overwhelmed. The boy who had slipped in quietly, day after day, had never been just a stranger. He was a soldier's son. A child holding the silence of loss in his small hands, trusting her with it in the only way he could. And somehow, in her own quiet way, she had answered that trust. The colonel unfolded the letter with careful hands, the paper creased but preserved, as if it had traveled far to arrive at this moment. The diner's hum faded beneath the weight of what was about to be read. Jenny stood still, clutching the edge of the counter, her heart echoing in her ears. "James wrote this before his last mission," Colonel Reeves said, voice low. "He asked us to deliver it if he didn't return." He cleared his throat and began to read. "To the woman at the diner, I don't know your name, and maybe I never will. But my son mentioned you in every letter he managed to send. He said there was someone who gave him breakfast, someone who didn't ask questions, someone who noticed he was hungry and chose to help, even when no one else did. He said you always brought food with a smile, that you never made him feel like a burden. He called you the quiet lady with kind eyes, said he felt safe there, even for just a little while. You fed my boy when I couldn't. While I was halfway around the world, you were there, steady, dependable, showing him that kindness still existed. And for that, I owe you more than I can put into words. I worried about leaving him behind, worried more when his mother left and he didn't tell anyone, but he told me about you. And I realized that in the middle of his fear and silence, he found someone who didn't need explanations to care. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. But you should know, what you did mattered. You didn't just feed a hungry child. You gave a soldier peace of mind in a place where peace is rare. Thank you for being there when I couldn't be. With all the gratitude a father can give, Master Sergeant James Thompson, U.S. Army. The words hung in the air, raw and full and real. Jenny blinked hard, but the tears still came. Not loud or messy, just slow, quiet, like the grief she'd carried silently for years. I didn't know, she whispered. I just couldn't let him go hungry. Colonel Reeves nodded, folding the letter with reverence. That's exactly why it mattered. And in that moment, Jenny understood. Her small, unnoticed kindness had reached across continents and battlefields, and it had come back, folded into a father's last thank you. The diner had never been so quiet. Not even during snowstorms or power outages had silence settled this deep, this complete. Every customer sat frozen in their seat, forks halfway to mouths, coffee cups paused mid-air. As Colonel Reeves straightened, squared his shoulders, and raised his hand in a formal, deliberate salute. Jenny blinked, still holding the letter, its paper trembling slightly in her grasp. The gesture hit her like a wave, so sudden, so immense, it left her breathless. Behind the colonel, the two younger officers followed suit, rigid, respectful, silent. Then, outside the diner, through the glass, more movement. The soldiers by the black SUVs turned in unison and saluted as well. A dozen men and women in uniform, standing in the cold Kansas morning, offering a gesture reserved for those who had earned the deepest kind of respect. Not for valor in combat, not for rank, but for a waitress in a small-town diner who had fed a boy without asking why. Jenny felt the warmth rise to her cheeks. Not pride, not embarrassment. Something deeper. A tenderness so big it barely fit inside her chest. She didn't know when the customers began standing. Maybe it was Harold first, pushing himself upright with stiff knees, eyes watery behind his thick glasses. Then Kathy, folding her arms tightly but standing nonetheless. Then others, regulars, strangers, even the businessmen who had once scoffed at her generosity. All rising to their feet, slowly, reverently, as if the floor beneath them had shifted and they were trying to find steady ground. Mark emerged from the kitchen, his apron still damp from the sink, eyes locked on Jenny. He didn't say a word, just stood beside her, head slightly bowed. No one spoke. No one needed to. In that stillness, something changed, not just in the diner, but in the people inside it. The mockery that once lived in whispers was gone, replaced with a quiet understanding, a reckoning. Jenny, who had always moved like background music, steady, unnoticed, was now the center of the room, the story that would be told for years. She hadn't done anything grand. She had made breakfast, left water, offered a smile, and it had mattered more than she could have ever imagined. As the salutes dropped slowly, the colonel stepped forward once more, voice steady but softer now. On behalf of the United States Army, and a boy who never forgot what you did, we thank you. Jenny nodded, too full to speak. But inside something settled, something that had been waiting years to be seen. The changes began quietly, just like everything else at Rosie's Diner. There were no grand announcements, no ribbon cuttings or news crews. But the air felt different. The way people looked at Jenny, softened, steadier. The way they sat at the booths, less rushed, more reverent. Word of the military visit had spread fast, too big a moment to stay small in a town like theirs. By the end of the week, The corner booth where Adam used to sit had a new addition. A small American flag was placed on the window ledge, its fabric still stiff, the stitching sharp and deliberate. Below it, on the tabletop, Mark installed a brass plaque. The lettering was simple, but it said everything. Reserved in honor of those who serve and the families who wait. No one questioned it. No one rolled their eyes. The booth was never left empty again. Veterans began showing up, some in uniform, some not. Parents with children. Travelers who had heard the story and made a detour just to sit where the boy once sat. They ordered coffee, eggs, pancakes, and left generous tips with quiet notes scribbled on napkins. Thank you for reminding us what matters. My brother served. You fed more than one soldier that day. Jenny didn't ask for the attention. She moved as she always had, clearing plates, pouring coffee, checking on refills. But now people watched her differently, with a kind of hush, not celebrity, reverence. The photo that had once mocked her online disappeared under a wave of new posts. Photos of the plaque, stories from veterans who sat in that booth, snapshots of the flag glowing in the morning light. People shared the story not to laugh now, but to remember. Mark surprised everyone, maybe even himself, when he started matching donations from regulars to create a fund. Quietly, discreetly. Meals for military families, especially those with a parent deployed. Just doing our part, he mumbled when asked, but Jenny saw the change in his eyes. Something had softened there, too. Kathy stopped calling the boy a stray. The bulletin board behind the counter began to fill. Unit patches, challenge coins, thank you notes from bases around the country. Rosie's Diner, the little place between the hardware store and the laundromat, had become something else now. A haven, a reminder. Not just because of what happened, but because someone chose to care without asking why. And in that booth, beneath that flag, with that plaque gleaming under the soft diner lights, Jenny's quiet kindness would never be invisible again. A manila envelope arrived one afternoon, addressed in careful, uneven handwriting. Jenny recognized it immediately. Not the sender, but the way the letters curved, deliberate and small, as if each word had been weighed before being written. She opened it behind the counter after the lunch rush, her hands trembling slightly as she unfolded the paper inside. The note was written on lined notebook paper, the kind used in elementary schools. The pen pressed hard in some places, the letters large, slightly shaky. At the top, in neat block print, was his name, Adam Thompson. Dear Miss Jenny, I didn't know your name until the day the soldiers came to find you, but I always knew who you were. You were the lady who looked at me like I wasn't invisible, like I wasn't broken. You brought me pancakes when I had nothing. You never asked why I was alone. You just gave me food and smiled like it was normal. That helped more than I think you'll ever know. Dad used to say heroes wear uniforms, but I think sometimes they wear aprons too. I was scared all the time. I didn't tell anyone Mom left. I didn't want to be taken away. I thought I could make it until Dad came back. I tried to make the money last. But when it got really hard, I went to the diner because it was warm. Because you were kind. You didn't treat me like a problem. Some mornings I didn't want to wake up, but I did, because I knew there would be a plate waiting. I didn't think you noticed me, but you did. You always did. Grandma and Grandpa are taking care of me now. They're kind. Grandpa is teaching me how to fish, and Grandma bakes cookies. But I still miss Dad, and sometimes I still miss your pancakes. Thank you for not asking me to explain. Thank you for not turning away. You helped me stay invisible just long enough to survive. And then you helped me feel seen when I needed it most. You didn't know me, but you helped me anyway. Your friend, Adam. P.S. I finished the book I was reading. It had a happy ending after all. Jenny read the letter twice before folding it gently and pressing it to her chest. It wasn't long, it wasn't flowery, but it was everything. Proof that what she did mattered, that the quiet, unnoticed kindness she had offered without expectation had reached farther than she ever realized. She framed the letter that night, hanging it behind the counter, not to display, not for praise, but to remember. Sometimes the smallest gestures leave the deepest marks. They didn't call her a hero, not out loud, not in any official way. But something had changed. The bell above the door chimed more often now, and it wasn't just locals stepping into Rosie's. Soldiers in uniform began arriving, men and women passing through town who had heard about the waitress who fed a soldier's son without ever asking for his name. They didn't make a fuss. They ordered coffee, maybe breakfast, and left patches or coins behind, small tokens tucked under napkins or slid discreetly into her hand as they left. Jenny didn't know what to say to them at first, but she learned that she didn't have to say much. A nod, a smile, a hand on the shoulder. It was enough. The bulletin board behind the counter had transformed into a collage of gratitude, unit badges from bases she'd never heard of, folded notes with messages scribbled in block letters, challenge coins engraved with words like honor, service, and now, kindness. There was even one from a unit in Germany, another from a base in Japan. Each time she pinned one up, she thought of Adam and the man who had trusted her without ever meeting her. Some customers came in just to see the booth, the one with the plaque, the one reserved for the boy who once sat alone with nothing but a book and a silent hunger. They would take photos, run their fingers over the brass lettering, or leave behind a meal paid for in advance. In honor of someone who helped my family, they'd sometimes say. Jenny remained the same in all the ways that mattered. She still tied her faded blue apron every morning, still poured coffee before the sun had risen, still knew every regular's order by heart. But there was something in her now, something quietly luminous, a warmth that reached beyond the counter, beyond the small walls of the diner. People felt it when they walked in, like they were stepping into a place where kindness wasn't a performance, it was policy. Sometimes, when no one was watching, Jenny would glance at the framed letter behind the counter. Adam's words, his thank you, a reminder that the smallest choices ripple farther than we ever expect. And though she never sought attention, people had begun to recognize her, not with fanfare, but with gratitude. A soldier's nod, a mother's quiet smile, a child looking up at her like she was someone worth becoming. She hadn't set out to be anything more than a waitress, but somewhere between pouring water and setting down pancakes, she becomes something else entirely. The coin was waiting at her station when she arrived, small, round, and impossibly polished. It sat beside her notepad, catching the morning light in quiet flashes. Jenny picked it up slowly, feeling the weight of it in her palm. On one side, the insignia of the U.S. Army Special Forces. On the other, a custom engraving, Semper Memor, always remembering. There was no note, no name, no sign of who had left it. Just the coin, deliberate and still. She slipped it into her pocket, the cool metal pressing gently against her skin as she tied her apron for the day. It didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a promise. Later that morning, Mark stepped out of the back office with a wooden sign tucked under his arm. He didn't say anything at first, just walked to the front window, cleared a space, and mounted it where every passerby could see. The letters were clean, hand-painted in white against a dark green background. Whoever you are, whatever you can pay, no one leaves hungry. Jenny paused mid-pour, coffee pot hovering over Harold's cup. She stared at the sign for a long moment, unsure what to say. Mark met her gaze and shrugged. Figured it was time. He walked away before she could respond, But she didn't need him to say more. His quiet change of heart echoed her own, built not from a single moment, but from a season of small ones that had changed them both. The sign didn't bring in crowds. It didn't need to. But word spread. People came, some who could pay, some who couldn't. And no one was turned away. Jenny served them all the same way she always had, with steady hands, soft eyes, and no questions. The coin remained in her pocket every shift. She would run her fingers over the engraving sometimes when the world felt heavy, when the booth in the corner was empty again, and the ache of absence crept back in. It reminded her of Adam, of his father, of all the unseen battles people carry in with them when they step through the door. Jenny didn't need recognition. She never had. But the sign in the window and the coin in her pocket told a story she was proud to be part of, one that began with a quiet boy and a plate of pancakes and became something bigger than them both. Kindness, once given, had a way of multiplying. The bell above the door jingled softly, the sound familiar, folded into the fabric of Jenny's morning. She didn't look up right away, just wiped the counter, refilled Harold's coffee, slid a plate of toast to the man at the end booth. Another ordinary start to another quiet day. But then she noticed the shift, a silence, a stillness. She turned, and there he was. Not Adam, not exactly. This boy was younger, maybe 7 or 8. Wide-eyed, with scuffed shoes and a shirt 2 sizes too big. He stood just inside the door, uncertain, hands buried in his pockets, gaze flicking toward the booths, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to sit down. Jenny didn't hesitate. She walked around the counter, slow and calm, like she had hundreds of times before. Her apron swayed gently with each step. The boy's eyes met hers, cautious and a little scared. "Hey there," she said softly, nodding toward the booth in the corner. "This one's open. It's a good seat." He nodded once, barely, and moved toward it. Backpack sliding across the leather, he climbed in with quiet care, shoulders hunched like he was preparing for someone to send him away. Jenny didn't ask any questions. She just turned and went to the kitchen. A few minutes later, she placed a plate in front of him. 2 pancakes, a drizzle of syrup, 1 sausage link on the side, and a folded napkin beside the fork. He looked at the food, then at her. No words, but she knew the look, the hunger that was more than just empty stomach, the silence that came from trying not to be seen, and the fear that if you spoke too loudly, it would all disappear. So she smiled. "Same as always, honey," she said, like it had always been his booth, his place. "No charge." The boy stared a moment longer, then picked up the fork. Jenny turned away before he took the first bite. Behind her, the plaque on the wall caught the light. Reserved in honor of those who serve and the families who wait. The flag above it fluttered slightly in the breeze from the vent. She moved back behind the counter, poured another coffee, and caught Kathy watching her with a small, knowing smile. Jenny said nothing. She didn't need to. A new story had just begun. Quiet, careful, and wrapped in the same kind of kindness that asked for nothing and gave everything. And like before, it all started with pancakes.